The most powerful man in the world had 200 people in the room. Advisors, generals, senators, friends. And he trusted almost none of them. Not because he was paranoid, not because he was cruel, but because Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, the author of Meditations, the man history calls the last great philosopher king, had learned something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives refusing to believe. Why would the ruler of an empire of 60 million souls choose to walk through his own palace alone? Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by people every single day of his reign. That is what being emperor meant. Nearly 19 years on the throne, campaigns along the Danube, plague sweeping through Rome, Senate meetings, military councils, diplomatic audiences, never alone, never unobserved, never unwatched. And yet, if you read Meditations, his private journal that was never meant for publication, you find a man who felt profoundly, almost painfully, isolated in the middle of all that crowd. He wrote about people who flattered him. He wrote about advisors who told him what he wanted to hear. He wrote about men who smiled to his face and whispered behind his back. He was not bitter about this. That is what makes it extraordinary. He was simply paying attention. If you have ever looked around a room full of colleagues and wondered how many of them were being honest with you, Marcus Aurelius spent nearly 19 years with that exact question. And he built a philosophy around the answer. By the end of this, you will understand not just why he trusted almost no one, but why that decision was the most rational, most disciplined thing he ever did. And you will recognize why you already know this feeling. You just haven't had permission to trust it yet. Let's start with what Marcus actually observed. He was emperor at 40, not by ambition. He had to be persuaded. He would have preferred his books, but once he took the role, he watched. Carefully, constantly. He noticed that the men around him divided into two categories. The first group told him what was true. The second group told him what would keep them safe. The second group was larger, much larger. In Meditations, Book 9, he writes about men who praise you when you succeed and disappear when you struggle. He writes about those who offer you their company when you are powerful and their absence when you are not. He was not describing betrayal. He was describing something more ordinary and more dangerous. The completely rational self-interest of people who need something from you. Here is the modern version of this. You get a promotion. Suddenly, people want to have lunch with you. You get fired. Suddenly, they are very busy. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire of 60 million people. Every single one of those relationships was contaminated by the same logic. What he concluded was not cynicism. It was arithmetic. The higher you rise, the harder it becomes to find people who are responding to you, rather than to what you represent. He understood this. He wrote it down, and then he made a decision. Here is where it gets specific and uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius had a particular problem with flattery, not because he enjoyed it, because he noticed how easily it worked on him when he wasn't paying attention. In Meditations, Book 6, he writes something that should stop you cold. He tells himself to be suspicious of any thought that begins with the belief that he deserves praise. Not suspicious of others praising him, suspicious of himself believing it. This is a level of self-awareness that most people never reach. He had understood something that modern psychology took 2,000 years to rediscover. Flattery does not work by making you believe the flatterer. It works by making you believe yourself. The person who praises you is simply activating a story you were already ready to tell. And so he developed a practice. Every time someone praised him, a general, an advisor, a senator, he asked himself one question: would this person say the same thing if I were not emperor? Not, would they lie? Not, are they manipulating me? Simply, does this person exist independently of my power? If the answer was no, and it usually was, he filed the relationship accordingly. He did not dismiss those people. He still used their counsel, valued their service, treated them with the dignity he believed every human being deserved. He simply did not trust their opinions about him, because their opinions about him were not about him. They were about their own survival. This is not paranoia. This is the ancient equivalent of something you already know. When your boss praises your work in a meeting, you feel it differently than when a friend who has nothing to gain tells you the same thing. You already know the difference. Marcus Aurelius built a system around it. Now, he was not entirely alone. Marcus Aurelius trusted very few people, but those few were chosen by a specific, identifiable standard. The first name in Meditations is not a senator or a general. It is his grandfather, his mother, his tutor Rusticus. People who knew him before he had power. People who had no strategic reason to be kind to him. He specifically credits his teacher Apollonius with teaching him to receive kindness without becoming dependent on it, and to maintain the same character, whether people were watching or not. That phrase, whether people were watching or not, is the whole secret. Marcus trusted people who were the same in private as in public, who said the same things in the room as outside it, who disagreed with him when they believed he was wrong, and who kept disagreeing even when he pushed back. He writes in Book 1 about being grateful to people who corrected him, not the people who supported him, the people who corrected him. Think about what that takes to genuinely feel gratitude for someone challenging you when you are the emperor, and they are technically risking their position by doing so. That is the person Marcus Aurelius trusted, not the person who made him feel good, the person who made him think harder. Marcus Aurelius, in his private quarters late at night, writing by candlelight. Around him, silence, his journal, his own thoughts. 40 advisors available, thousands of soldiers sworn to his service. The most sophisticated political apparatus in the ancient world at his disposal. And he is writing alone, because the only voice he trusts completely in that moment is the one he is constructing on the page. You are reading emails at midnight, or scrolling through messages and wondering which of them are real, or sitting in a meeting and feeling the particular exhaustion of being around people who are performing for you instead of talking to you. Nearly 1,350 years apart. Same silence, same question. Who in this room is actually here with me? Marcus Aurelius discovered that the answer was almost no one, and that this was not a personal failure. It was not a reflection of his worth, or his leadership, or his character. It was the architecture of power. And the architecture of power is simply the architecture of need made visible. The people around him needed him. They were not free, and people who are not free cannot give you the one thing trust requires: honest indifference to the consequences. Here is what Marcus Aurelius understood that almost nobody else did, then or now. He did not try to find trustworthy people by looking for honesty. He tried to find trustworthy people by looking for people with nothing to lose. The teachers who shaped him were not powerful men. Apollonius lived simply. Rusticus corrected him when he was still a child, before the throne was guaranteed. His mother refused most of the luxuries of imperial life. What they shared was the same thing. They did not need Marcus to be emperor. They would have cared for him if he had been a farmer, and so they were free to tell him the truth. This is the Stoic insight that every modern leadership book misses. You will not build trust by demanding honesty. You will not build trust by creating a culture of transparency. You will build trust, real trust, the kind that survives pressure, only by surrounding yourself with people whose well-being does not depend on your approval. People who need nothing from you can afford to be honest. People who need everything from you can only afford to be kind. Marcus Aurelius, the ruler of the known world, spent nearly 2 decades structuring his entire inner circle around this single counterintuitive principle. He was not looking for loyalty. He was looking for independence. Because a person who is free from needing you is the only person who can ever truly choose you. And so he built his life around the almost empty room, not as loneliness, as precision. He answered his question, the one about who he could trust. Not by finding better people, by understanding what made a person capable of trust in the first place. But here is what Marcus never fully resolved. He had built a system for finding people he could trust. He had never built a system for becoming the kind of person others could trust him to be. And the gap between those two things, trusting others versus being trustworthy yourself, is where Meditations gets dark. Because Marcus Aurelius had a son. His name was Commodus, and Marcus trusted him with everything. That story is different. What happened between a philosopher-emperor and the heir he believed in, and what it cost Rome, is one of the most devastating failures of trust in recorded history. How did the man who understood betrayal better than anyone fail to see it coming from inside his own family? That question has an answer, and it begins with something Marcus wrote in private about Commodus that he never showed to anyone.